everyone in the startup ecosystem has heard about the main Flipkart story. And it's a fascinating story because it had many interesting characters, a lot of suspense, and many, many subplots. And so one of the interesting subplots, if you remember, was Flipkart's announcement sometime in 2015 that it will shut down its website and force everyone to use their product only through the app. Right? Of course, Flipkart had to backtrack from that, but the Flipkart's engineering team had responded wonderfully to that initiative. And one of the beautiful things that came out of that was the progressive web app, the browser-based app that looks like a native app. And it's one of the most commonly used web technologies in the world. Another wonderful subplot was Flipkart's efforts to build a brand that was accessible to all Indians, not just to people in the metros, not just to people in tier 1 cities, but across India, tier 2, 3, 4 cities. Right? And today, thanks to Shoumyan, we'll have the opportunity to hear about this part of the story, the details of this subplot. Right? Shoumyan was with Flipkart between 2013 to 2019. He headed marketing for them for a long time. He also was head of some business units for them, so he has multiple perspectives of the Flipkart story. Just set the context for Flipkart story. I think there were 3 phases roughly of Flipkart's journey. Phase 1 was the foundational phase that was lasted between 2008 to 2014. Right? Flipkart initially focused on selling books and using the book selling business to build the India-wide distribution network. After Flipkart cracked that, then it entered into electronics and subsequently, by Myntra, then, through that, got access to fashion. The phase 2 was actually the most interesting phase, and I think we'll touch upon that today to some extent too, which was the intense fight that was there between Amazon and Flipkart. And the third phase started when it started becoming clear that Flipkart will be able to hold on, to its lead. It will be able to, compete against a much larger, much stronger competitor. You joined in 2013, which is when the foundational pieces were being laid. What did Flipkart do in that 2013 to 2015 phase to build the foundational pieces of the brand?
So, when I think of foundations of any organization, there are perhaps 3 key aspects to it, right? Mm-hmm. First is about getting the strategy right or getting the priorities right, and hence tasks or jobs to be done emerging out of it. Mm-hmm. Second is getting the right organization structure that supports the strategy. And third is getting the right alignment with cross functions, because no team in today's world works in silos, right? So you have to work with people. Mm-hmm. So strategy, structure, and alignment, I think, are the 3 key pivots. But before I talk a little bit about each one of them, right? I think I would like to talk about some of the personal learnings or principles that I got to learn, or I had the opportunity to learn during my time at Flipkart, which shaped many of these stages, right? Mm-hmm. And I think these principles are about brand building in the digital world, right? Like, what are the things that one needs to keep in mind? The first principle, or the first lesson rather, for me, is the fact that there was a time where brands became what the brand said themselves.
Yeah.
I think that day is gone. Today, brands become what one consumer tells the other about what that brand stands for. Mm-hmm. And the reason that change has happened was that about 20 years back, brands and consumers used to have one-way communication. Only brands came and spoke to you, whether it's on television commercial or billboard or whatever.
Right.
And consumers had a narrower circle of influence. Like, so we grew up in our neighborhood and perhaps only interacted with our neighborhood people and people that we knew, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Thanks to social media, the world has got connected. Tanzania and Turkey gets connected in seconds, right? Mm. And brands get trolled or appreciated in a two-way communication by consumers as much as brands get to speak to consumers. So I think this insight is very important. Anyone building a digital brand has to not just tell people what you are about and sell your product, mm-hmm. but you also have to shape the consumer narrative that is building around you. Mm-hmm. At Flipkart, we used to call as the two charters, or rather the two paths to the charter, which is make people transact with your brand and get people to talk about your brand.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
That was the first lesson. The second lesson is, much like humans get to know each other, brands also go through a few stages of evolution.
Mhm.
Brands go from being unknown to being known for something specific, to being trusted, to being loved. It's exactly like two people meet in college and then they don't know each other and then they get to like each other and then they get married and then they become the most loved people that they have in their lives, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Human and brand relations are actually no different, right? And the tactical way of brand building is to focus on television commercial and build awareness,
Yeah.
and then do some discounts and get volumes. The strategic way of brand building is to define which stage you are in and do actions accordingly.
Mhm.
And the third lesson for me, which was perhaps the most potent of the three,
Mhm.
was that in a traditional world, you had the luxury of taking a large amount of time to work on one activity. So I come from an FMCG background, and I remember we used to take 18 months to launch an innovation, then learn from it and move over to the next innovation. In the digital world, because life changes so fast, both macroeconomically and microeconomically,
Yeah.
you do not have the luxury of this much of time, right? So
Right.
you need to adopt what I call as the fail fast and learn faster doctrine, right?
Mhm.
And we used to have this very simple model at Flipkart, where we used to say that traditional worlds are think, do, think model. You think for a long period, you execute in between, and then you think again.
Mhm.
Whereas in digital world, you actually pivot this to do, think, do. You're continuously doing things, and in between, you have a period to reflect, learn fast, and change.
And just Shravan, to make it more concrete, the five stages that you talked about, from unknown to known to known for something and so
Right.
on. Could you give an example of how Flipkart navigated that journey?
Yeah, sure. So, for instance, at the beginning of the Flipkart journey, it was all about converting the brand from unknown to known, and some part of it, even in the first couple of years, was actually happening entirely on word of mouth, right? Flipkart service being superior and stuff like that.
Yeah.
The next phase was where we were using sort of inorganic tools like communication, advertising. The kids as grown up adults came in, which basically made Flipkart from an unknown entity to a known entity.
Yeah.
And how you were evaluating was that you were looking at metrics like search volumes, you were looking at metrics like top of mind recall, spontaneous recall, and stuff like that, to measure whether you were actually moving from not aware to aware. Then the next phase where you were actually trying to build relevance, right? And over there, what you were trying to do was to make Flipkart known for something. And this something changed with time, but we were adding more feathers as we were going along. Like, for instance, initially Flipkart would be known as a destination that would make online shopping as easy as a child's play.
Mhm.
It would then very soon talk about the fact that it connects the whole country, that it didn't matter whether you were in Surat or in Coimbatore, you could buy the same pair of shoes from anywhere, right? It moved on to talking about it being a destination of the nicest and the coolest exclusive smartphones, right? So that was the, building what you are known for phase, right? Which is what I call as relevance building. So different consumer segments will relate to these things and sort of jump onto it, right? And the way to measure it would be measure it on social NPS. You see the kind of consumer voice that's building on social, measure it in terms of how consumer perceptions are changing on key attributes, and also measure it in terms of your acquisition funnel. If you're doing this well, then your cost of acquisition or cost of installs for the segment that relates to these attributes should come down over a period of time.
Right.
Then in the third phase, we figured out modules to sort of build trust, make people, not worry about, going wrong with Flipkart, right? And this is where trust markers like COD, original products, even Flipkart assured tag, some of those things came in. Some of the really cool marketing campaigns at that point in time was Flipkart Matlab Bilkul Pakka, right? So some of those things came in, and the way to sort of measure this phase will be how your trust attributes are going up, how the trust levers are going up, which means what percentage of your sale went to Flipkart Assured, or what percentage of your sale was coming from some of the trust levers like original products, returns, and stuff like that. So that's the third phase. And then the fourth phase, where the brand has become mature, where your spontaneous recall is in mid to late 90s, where almost everyone knows about the brand, your funnel has strengthened. I think there is an opportunity for brands to go to the next level, from being trusted to being loved, right? And the journey of moving from trusted to loved is that you no longer can only talk about your product context, right? Product context takes you only up till the trust phase. You have to take a purpose context, right? And stand for things that people relate to, which may not be linked to your brand's transactional values. And at Flipkart, we say that, look, we are an Indian brand, and we will stand for everything that makes India progressive. Right? Like how, for instance, people are embracing different communities of people, how people are embracing diversity, how men are taking parenting in an active way. One of the best, my favorite campaigns that came out at that period of time was the Penguin Dad campaign, which focused on all dads who take equal interest in parenting and help their wives out, right? So basically standing for something that really resonates and appeals with people in a slightly more meaningful and purposeful manner is what kindles sort of love, right? The second and the most very, very critical part that I personally learned in setting up foundation was the organization structure, right? And once again, the more conventional way of going about an organization structure is to straight away jump and build functions like mobile marketing and CRM and stuff like that, right? One of the things, and to be honest, I also started like that. I have to be very honest, and I learned it the wrong way, the tough way. One of the things that I have learned is that the best and the surest way of building an organization structure is to start by asking yourself, what kind of competency do you need to build? And at Flipkart, we believe that there were 5 competencies that were required. One was design thinking, to be able to connect the dots and create something that will make sense for the consumer and not for your function or your product. Second was data leverage. No consumer tech company with aspiration of scale can actually prosper if you do not have people who can mine data and convert observations into insights. Third was creative appreciation, right? You cannot build a great or an excellent marketing function or brand building function without the right creative excellence, because finally your creatives need to entertain and inspire people. Then the other 2 in my mind were channel depth. Like you needed really people who were adept at the right channels, like for instance, how to grow affiliates, how to get the right kind of installs and stuff like that. And the mobile outreach agility, right? And I'm using the word agility because mobile media landscape is something that has perhaps changed the most in the last 7 years. The channels that used to work in 2010 are the ones which are obsolete now. TV and stuff like that. Right? So I think what I needed from the media planning guys was this keenness, this curiosity to try new things. You remember we spoke about fail fast, learn faster kind of a thing. So design thinking, creative appreciation, data leverage, media agility, and depth with the 5 competencies that I was looking at. And accordingly, we sort of broke the org up into brand marketing, performance marketing, merchandising, events and alliances, and growth, right? And sub teams underneath them, right?
Any markers that you've had to kind of give, or looking back at least, to kind of tell yourself that yes, we are ready for this, to transition from this phase of journey to the next phase? You talked about the measures, but are there indicators that help you decide to transition to the next phase?
Yeah, again, I think this is category to category, but I guess, you move from unaware to aware if you become one of the top 3 or 4 most aware players in terms of spontaneous recall in your category, right? To become known for something, if there is an attribute, like for instance, Flipkart sells the coolest and the latest smartphones exclusively. If your scores on that attribute is highest amongst everyone, then you know that you are known for it, right? Similarly, when you start seeing lower customer acquisition cost, higher repeats, higher LTV, you begin to understand that you're getting closer to being trusted, right? When you understand that consumers are a little more forgiving of you for the same mistake that they are for other brands, you know that they've started loving you, right? And if you just apply this to our lives also, that's what we do, right? For the same mistake, we are more forgiving to people we love or trust than the ones we don't.
Cool. So let's get to the second phase now, perhaps, where the bloodiest war was fought, and actually Flipkart won that war. So it's interesting to talk about that. But just for the sake of context again for everyone, in 2015, Flipkart had 45% market share, while Amazon had entered India in 2013. But by 2015 they had acquired roughly 10% market share. But this changed dramatically in 2016. Flipkart share reduced to 35% roughly, and Amazon grew not only at the expense of Flipkart, but even more at the expense of Snapdeal to around 25%. Right. So from the outside, it was looking, that Flipkart was losing market share too rapidly to Amazon, and perhaps that Amazon could even win the war. Right. But then something changed. Something changed, and Flipkart was able to hold on to its market share, and not only hold on to market share, but also slowly increase it. Shoumyan, what happened? What triggered this turnaround?
In my personal reflections, I feel that sometime in 2015, mid to late 2015, we got our consumer strategy wrong, right? We were perhaps dialing down a lot more on the marketplace expansion because it gave us immediate better profitability and unit economics and also enhanced reach. And in the process, we did not anticipate or fully understand, I would say, the impact of that on consumer trust and consumer experience, right? And that was perhaps the reason that gave opening to a competitor, right? Otherwise, I think Flipkart was an incredibly strong brand, at least in that space, in the first half of 2015. You asked me what triggered the change, and I think there are 3 things, right? One is getting the focus back. Second is relentless execution. And the third, finding ways to get more out of less. Right? And I want to talk about the first one in a bit more detail, Ajay. I think, as I was saying, I think we had lost a little bit of the focus sometime in 2015.
Right.
And in 2016, with the sort of a new team coming in, I think this is the focus that we brought back. So we say that, look, in order to win a battle, you can't win every single front, right? You have to choose the battles and win them decisively. And I found that to be the most poignant part of our turnaround, right? I've always believed strategy is as much about saying what you will not do as it is about saying what you will do. And in 2016, we articulated the strategy that while Amazon was focused on the experience seeker affluent community, Flipkart decided to focus on the value-seeking middle India community. Now, there was a natural consequence of that, which means all of us, our friends, our families, living in the metro cities, many of us in large societies, would perhaps see more Amazon parcel coming every day than we would see of Flipkart. But that was a choice we made. We were very clear about that choice. And as a result, the focus categories, the focus items that would go into selection, all of those changed. But to me, the biggest reason why this worked was that we really understood what value meant. Now, there was a time where value meant greatest discount. But we realized that value in today's time is not about finding the lowest price for for a given benefit. It is about finding more benefits for a given price.
Yeah.
And hence the entire promotional model, the UI, entry into new businesses like consumer finance, creating products, fintech solutions, all of those kind of things actually came from that ethos. How can you provide more benefits for a given price point rather than doing everything to lower the price point? I think every function did their part, right? A small bit that the marketing communications team did was this absolutely favorite campaign of mine, which is called Itne Mein Itna. If you look at the normal Indian psychology, people say कि इतने पैसे में इतना ही मिलता है, which means it's all that you will get in this money. And to building on more benefits for a given price, we said इतने में इतना मिलेगा. Now that itna is no longer a constraint, it's actually a lot more. Right? Work like magic.
And I think it's important you mentioned that. I'd like to just reiterate, which is that Flipkart was willing to lose the battle, which is the top tier customers, in order to win the war.
Yeah.
Right. So it's the focus, right? The ability to say no to a few things.
Right.
I think it's a critical part of that,
right.
That journey, right? Which helped you focus very, very sharply on that particular customer segment.
And look, I think, some people will say that the jury is still out, right? And it is. A battle like Flipkart versus Amazon doesn't get closed in 2 years or 5 years, right? It perhaps continues for 20 years and something like that, right? There is also another argument that in most industries or most countries, the experience seekers actually end up determining the market, because they become the aspirational quotient and the value seekers want to be like experience seekers. Right?
Yeah.
So I think we will have to learn over a period of time, and the next 5-10 years will tell us whether this is working or not. But so far it's working great for the company, right?
Yeah.
And we also got to understand that India is different. India may not be US. India may not be some of the European countries where experience seekers have gone ahead to determine the market. Here, value seekers may very well determine the market. You take any industry like automobile, the value seeking are the ones that dominate the volume share.
Exactly.
So, anyways, I think that to me was one of the great wins of Flipkart, the focus. And the second win that came, and I think this is where once again the whole team coming together point gets substantiated, is relentless execution on the focus. Beginning from how a category will be launched, to how its UI will appear, to how the policies will manifest, to the communications, to delivery, to designing of events like a Big Billion Day and stuff like that. I think Big Billion Days are perhaps the greatest examples of, like thousands of really talented people coming together and pulling in one direction and making magic happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think relentless execution and getting the focus right by saying that here is what we will give up on is what I think triggered the turnaround.
Got it. And I think you also mentioned the third one, which is more from less. Yeah. And I remember that, Amazon in the 2016, 17, 18 period was actually the top 2 or 3 advertisers in India. I mean, they were up there with HULs and PM, Procter and Gamble's of the world.
Right.
But Flipkart didn't play that game. Right? Flipkart actually did not, let Amazon define the rules of the game. Flipkart actually changed the rules of the game, right? And which is where I think the more for less angle comes in. So maybe you could tell a little bit about that. How did Flipkart go about doing that?
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly one of my most memorable phases from my Flipkart journey. Right, I remember that we had a set of core values in the marketing team, right? And those values were values of creative excellence, innovation, and frugality, right? So we said that, look, if our creative is good, we don't need to spend 20 crores behind it. It is likely to act like 10 crores if I put 5. If my message is sharp, if my creative is good, if it can move people, I will get the same effect with much lesser dollar. And some of the things that we focused on were very, very sharp positioning. Often marketers make a mistake of treating communication as a newspaper. Newspaper has a large set of information. Advertising is not supposed to be informative alone. It is supposed to be informative and entertaining. That's why we say infotainment, right? You can't put 20 messages in one commercial. It just loses its sharpness. Second is, there is a famous saying in advertising which says that, I know 50% of my advertising dollar is wasted. I don't know which 50%. And the reason that happens is that in most hotly contested categories, if X puts some dollars, consumers think that it's coming from Y brand, which is called misattribution. The way we broke that was our kids as grown-up adults device. People uniquely knew the moment they saw the kidult's device that, hey, listen, this is a Flipkart app. So pushing for creative excellence was one value. The second was frugality, which is essentially how can you make 1 rupee seem like 5 rupee? And I think I have perhaps 50, 60 examples, but I will maybe talk about 2, 3. So one example, which a lot of marketers, if they are on the call, will relate to, that very often we find it difficult to figure out that social media spends ko kaise evaluate kare.
Yeah.
So what we used to do was that every social media activity, we used to plot them on a 2x2. The y-axis used to be engagement rate, and the x-axis used to be cost of reach. The other way of defining them is that y-axis is effectiveness, whether it's giving you the output, and the x-axis is whether it's giving you the right efficiency.
Right.
And we will soon, over the 6-month period, figure out which creatives are both effective and efficient and start dialing down on them. A great example of, learning how to get the more out of less.
Yeah.
The other thing that we do, and I'll give you a completely different example on performance marketing, right? Like, for instance, mobile installs. We plotted every single mobile install from different sources on another 2x2, where we had average revenue per install on one axis and cost per installs on the other. Same, effectiveness, efficiency.
Yeah.
And we figured out which of the sources maximize both effectiveness and revenue, which means and efficiency, which means they come at a lower cost and they give you more revenue over the next 14-day period.
Finance.
Or what we also did was that for every category, we had a plot of SEM money along with the RPC, which is revenue per cost. And we saw that for every category, there was a threshold period where it maximized, and after that, you got diminishing returns. So we figured out that even though the SEM spends of our competition was 4x of us, they got only 20% more revenue. So we stopped at X. We didn't go to 4x. It made sense for us to work on, right?
Yeah.
So, and tons of these examples. I don't want to talk more about it, right? And on innovation, right? And I think that's the other part that we were like, we were really pushing the boundaries. I think at one point in time, probably half the innovation lineup of a Google and Facebook were used to be first launched with Flipkart in India. At some point in time, we were directly working in many cases with their global teams because we were confident that to launch a product and test pilot, this is the team to work with. One of my favorite example is how we took personalization to another level, where we actually made not 1, but 2, but 3, but actually 3 million, which is 30 lakh personalized video assets, which reached out to you with a message and reached out to me with a different message. Right? And this improved our conversion by about 45%. So, by focusing on excellence of the creative, which appeal to people, by focusing on frugality measures that maximize effectiveness and efficiency, and by focusing on continuously doing new things, push the envelope and challenged, why can't it be done this way? We made X dollars seem like 3X dollars. And even though Amazon was spending 4X, we got really, really, really close to them and never quite lost the battle.
I do remember there was this phase where this innovation and frugality was combined very beautifully, and which was the Big Ten sale phase, right? Which is, Kuch Bada Aane Wala Hai campaign, and it was held very interestingly in an off-peak season.
Yeah.
Right, and I think it did wonders, in terms of getting people interested in it in a May June period when typically they don't buy as much. So perhaps you could tell a little bit about it, because I think it also had a very wonderful personalized sequencing of of digital. Use the YouTube and Facebook very nicely during that phase. Maybe a little bit about that.
Yeah. No, I think pretty much riding on the three principles. I think Big Ten is perhaps one out of the 10 examples that we did in that period, right? So we asked ourselves the question that, look, why is it necessary that we need to spend on television or print to get the same kind of impact or jump that we normally get in large events?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it seemed a crazy question to ask when it was asked for the first time. Right? But as we went down, very often crazy questions lead to unique answers, right? We figured out that, look, beyond a point in time, the role of television and print, especially print in large events, was actually giving an aura to the event, right? Now, for Big Billion Day, where you needed a long-term strategic brand building of the property, you needed that aura. But you could do away with that aura and yet get an effective event, right, without spending so much, right? And hence we took on this challenge that we would create an event in the off season, right, where people won't buy, and we will do a digital only event. So so what we went ahead and did was exactly on these three principles: find a creative that will generate massive intrigue. So we didn't say a sale or anything. We just, if I remember the campaign line, we just went ahead and said, okay, something big is going to come.
Correct. Yes.
And that obviously queued up because no one was expecting an event at that point in time, right?
Yeah.
And then what we also did was that we had an outreach plan which was sequential in nature, which means I had a series of assets. Let's say I had 5 creatives. Now, if you saw the first one, then you will see the second. But if you saw the second one first, then you will see the third. So there was a different sequence made for everyone, so that I am not wasting money to make you see video 1 if you have already seen video 2. And this sequential approach of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for few people, 2, 3, 4, 5 for some, 3, 4, 5 for others, etc., helped us save the money. Otherwise, what happens is that if you run all 3 videos at the same time, if you have seen 3 and I have seen 2, company is spending money to make both of us see 1. Right? Whereas we figured out that we don't need to do that, right?
Yeah.
So, and this was a great example of frugality that we sort of learned from that period of time. And we got magical results, right? I think that was perhaps one of the first time an event in that period was made successful with so little spends, right? Of that scale, right? I think some people may still find a 5 crore or a 6 crore spend as substantial, but to keep the Flipkart scale in mind in comparing the numbers. Yeah. So again, I think the principles were very similar, but different executions of them.
Exactly. And I think it combines the principle that you mentioned, that it was not only frugality but also the innovation, right? The ability to sequentialize things, the ability to use a medium in a very specific way, and to learn, right, as you go along. So you are not held hostage to an medium and others ways of using it, but you're actually innovating and actually pushing the boundaries on that.
Absolutely.
Right. Perfect. That's wonderful. So let's come to the last phase, right? And I think which is so that we can open up the conversation to others to ask their questions. But in the third phase, it was clear that Flipkart was going to hold on its own, right? But I think it's a very dangerous stage, right? Which is when you have established the lead, you're retaining the lead. It's very tempting at that stage to take the foot off the pedal.
Right.
But Flipkart didn't do this. Flipkart actually consolidated its lead. It actually ensured that the advantage didn't slip away. And so, can you tell us a little bit about what did Flipkart do in this stage to make sure that it becomes even more efficient and even more effective, the two dimensions that you talked about during this period?
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the things that happens is that when you have seen the signs of victory in a difficult war, complacency starts coming in. Celebration takes over focus, right? And I think at the center of everything, I think that did not happen for Flipkart, right? As I said some time back, also the jury is still out because the war is not over. It's going to be over in 5 years or 7 years or whatever, right? So it's going to last for some time, but at least in the period that we have seen gone behind us, right? I think Flipkart did not lose the focus. I think why we celebrated, but we ensured that the celebration did not come at the cost of focus. I think the couple of things. So firstly, we continue doing what we were doing, but the couple of things that changed from what we were doing earlier to what we did over the next 2 years was in my mind, bring a lot more focus to strengthening the customer funnel. Right now, it was a big company, so how do you strengthen the entire customer funnel and improve the LTV? And I'll talk a little bit about it in a second.
Sure.
And the second area that happened was that in addition to building the horizontal platform metrics, how did the company go about building some of the other vertical businesses? This is the period where home as a business became bigger. This is a period where fashion absolutely skyballed, right? This is a period where Flipkart forayed into groceries, made large appliances much bigger. So I think the two things that in my mind happened was the focus on the customer funnel and strengthening the funnel, and moving beyond 2 or 3 categories like smartphones and branded shoes and saris to a lot more categories like home, grocery, general merchandise, baby, large appliances, and so on and so forth. Right. So I think these are the two things, right? And I'll maybe quickly cover both of them in a few minutes. On the first one, I think again we took a multi-step approach. The first step was that have a clear view to consumer segments, right? And this is again another question. A lot of young marketeers ask me, what's the right way to segment consumers? Is it demographic? Is it psychographic? And people come up with these crazy consumer segments called soccer moms or fashionista fanatics and all of that, right? They must be all great, Ajay, in some context, right? I have always believed the segments, any segmentation that gives you first mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive segments, which is what we call as MEES, and second, segments which are targetable and actionable are worth a discussion. Everything else is not. If a fashionista fanatics acts as a soccer mom on Sunday and fashionista fanatic on most other days, and I can't find her or target her, then it's not actionable. If I can, then it's actionable. So one of the things that we learned is that, look, our segmentation has to be behavioral. This is the behavior that you have done on the platform. So accordingly, we divided up into browsers, lapsers, light users, heavy users, super heavy users. And we did that on the basis of frequency and AOV. One of the projects that I was working on during the last few months of my stay with Flipkart was to also do this segmentation on the back of contribution margin, so that you can add the layers of value building or value eroding. So you could be a super heavy customer, but if you're only buying Xiaomi, which has a significantly low contribution margin, then you're value eroding. But fundamentally, both of them are behavior based, right?
Sure.
Having defined various segments, right, whether you are a lapser or a light user, you define clear consumer JTPTs. And the JTPTs were some 3 JTPTs. One was get more users, which would target at browsers and lapsers, basically new hire or rehire. Second was more usage, which would drive more frequency of purchase occasions or make them uptrade to higher order benefit. And the third was more diversity, which means make them buy across categories, across super categories, and which was aimed at the super heavy customer. So you had more users aimed at browsers and lapsers. You had more usage, which was aimed as light and heavy users. And you had more diversity, which was aimed at the super heavy. And the step 3 was very, very simple. in the sense of creating a program or set of programs for each one of them. So you will design an acquisition program, you will design a reactivation program, you will design upsell, cross-sell program, and the loyalty program for each of the segments, for each of the JTBs, and then define metric and relentlessly go around. The net result is that you will find it easier to acquire. Once you have acquired, they will move faster between light to heavy to super heavy, and they will also lapse in a lesser frequency. And if that happens, the customer bucket becomes less leaky, more potent, improving the overall LTV. The thing that I think most companies should do or can do and set it up in the initial stages, which when in the period I was there, we hadn't completed. But if I had the opportunity to go back and do it again, I will do it on the back of contribution margin also. So that I just don't have heavy users and super heavy users. I have value eroding super heavy users and value building super heavy users, so that I know accordingly, right? So I think that's the other part that we didn't do, but I would, on reflection, do it, right? So that's one. I think the second thing that happened was building the vertical categories in addition to the horizontal platforms. When I say vertical, it just does not mean a grocery and a general merchandise and a sports and fitness, etc. It also meant non-e-commerce categories like travel, like recharges, like Flipkart video that's building, right? So fundamentally, the approach over there, Ajay, was that focus on things that either maximize transactions or maximize time spent. In other words, it actually gives you either more DAU or gives you more units.
Yeah.
And hence you had things like recharges and video, which will give you more DAU. But equally, you will have things like a grocery and a baby and toys, which will give you more units, right? And one of the challenges that we faced, which also I get asked by many people who are handling marketplaces, that look, unlike brands where I have a central core, for a marketplace, because I'm an amalgamation of so many different categories and benefits, how do I manage this horizontal versus vertical debate? How do I make a consistent brand, right?
Exactly.
And my answer to that is that, look, because in marketplace you are an amalgamation, or you're an aggregate of multiple brands and multiple brand colors, brand tonalities, brand imagery. Your central core cannot be a very large central core. You will look and sound different, because very often you will do a joint marketing campaign with a brand where the tonality will be that brand's. So the critical part over here is to define what is that central core, right? And in my mind, from our experience, the central core was the brand colors. The brand colors can't change. B, the brand device, which is kids as grown-up adults. And C, the brand promise. If you stood for value, do not go and communicate and actively talk about something that is not giving value. Everything else, be clear. Be okay to change, tagline and all of those kind of things, right? So I think these three, and we use the same principle in growing them. This is a very interesting anecdote in this growing this category of fashion. So while the brand was focusing on value-seeking consumers and maximizing benefits for a given price point, fashion, while this was important for them, fashion is an aspirational category, right? People don't just buy clothes for the necessary aspect of it, but they also want to look and feel good. So there is an aspect of looking up to something.
Correct. It's not just a need, but also want. They want to look good. Yes.
It's a desire, and therefore, how your UI dials up this experience, right? How celebrity fashion gets intertwined with the core values of the brand. All of these factors are important. And I think this is where we found one of our biggest challenge, as to how to do justice to Flipkart as well as do justice to Flipkart fashion. And I think this is where we got the principle right. Like, that don't change the brand colors, don't give up on the brand device. Fashion needed celebrities. So we had this unique take of celebrities working with kids. We didn't give up on the brand device, but we had the celebrity. And then don't give up on promise. The promise is value. So give more at an affordable value. So we would actually do the trendiest styles at under 500 or at under 1,000. The focus was not on the 1,000. The focus was that it was available at price point.
Maybe you could talk about some of the mistakes that the brand builders can avoid.
I think the first one is a lot of brand builders. So there is a growing misconception that marketeers are the owners of the brand, right? And most marketeers think that the way to build a brand is designing a beautiful communication. That's the first mistake. Communication is one of the ways of building a brand. And why? It was a very potent weapon to build a brand when brands became what brands said of themselves. Right? Today it is no longer. So in my mind, the way to go about it is don't think yourself as a communication expert. Own every customer touch point. You may not be executing them, but find out what's happening at every consumer touch point. What promises are being made and what promises are being breached. Where is the experience falling? The role is that of TCE, owner of total customer experience. And most brand builders don't focus on that. The second point that I think a lot of us make mistakes is that, see, every organization says they're customer first. But when customer first collides with business first wins. So I'll tell people to shamelessly bring the voice of customer to boardrooms and leadership rooms wherever possible. I have this famous line, Ajay, not famous, a line that I really like, that I use with many people, which is, you are your customer's attorney.
Good point.
You've been appointed by your customer to bring his or her voice to a leadership forum. It may get trashed, but you should continue to do that. And a lot of us don't do it.
Yeah.
And the third thing is, brand building is one of those functions, and product design also is. Like, it's a combination of both art and science, right? And you need to embrace both, right? Generally, you see two types of decisions. One are deterministic decisions, like design the shortest route from A to B, or probabilistic decisions like between these two scripts, which one will work better. Data and science and ROI-based approach solves for the first, which is deterministic decision making. Intuition and creative instincts solve for the second one, which is probabilistic decision making. You will never know whether the other script would have created a better film, but you still have to take that decision at that point. And I would urge brand builders to embrace both and not just one. Don't lose one for the other.
One more question that has been asked, and I think it becomes relevant, because of the noise that's out there, which is, how do you make a brand stand out amongst all the competitors that are out there in the market?
For everything, there are hacks, right? And I would suggest that there are perhaps 2-3 approaches. The surest form, Ajay, is to have a differentiated product or offering. But we know that in real life, that's not always easy to have them, right? But if you could have it, that's the surest and the most potent way of making your brand stand out. If you do not have that, right, make sure or focus on 2 specific things. One, communication-led, which is make your message sharp. Don't try to say 5 things together. And layer it with a device so that you cut through, so that there is no misattribution. Focus on saying something sharp and have a device that will carry it through. And the second, ensure that every time a promise is made at every customer touch point, that promise is delivered. Please err on the side of making fewer promises, but never end up having more promises and more breach. That kills the brand.
Great. I think one corollary to that is that the promises should be tangible and measurable, because only, if you say I'm the best product and there's no way for customers to verify that, then that becomes a empty promise, so to say. So it should be tangible and measurable promise.
And relevant.
Right? And relevant promise.
You could come and tell me that you have built the best device to go from Earth to Moon, and you could be right. It might take you, it's measurable, it may take you in the shorter time, but I don't want to go to more. Right? So it needs to be relevant and measurable and tangible, right?
Yeah.
And then just ensure that every promise, not promises made on social media by the creative team, but promises made by the call center executive. And I think that is the key point, right? Today's brand builders will need to own every customer touch point and not just a touch point or a couple of touch points.
And how would you do that? So you actually are like, in some sense, let's say either a Rebel or a Flipkart, you would actually start building a platform, a data platform, which ingests signals from all the touch points, so that the brand team can then have a overview on this. Is that how you would go about doing it?
I think that's perhaps the version 3 of it, right? Mm-hmm. Where everything gets automated and pulled in one place. Mm-hmm. I think we are still learning, or we are still evolving from one phase to the other phase, right? Mm-hmm. We are still evolving from a phase where marketing was only communication, or brand building was only with marketing, which was only handling communication, to this total customer experience part. So therefore, I think the way it's done in most organizations today is that this function engages with the customer care team, with the product insights team, the user insights team, and collates this to an extent manually. Mm-hmm. But I think what you're saying is absolutely right. There has to be a common customer listening platform, mm-hmm. where everything that the customer is saying on whichever portal or place, is sort of collated together, so that we have a comprehensive view of everything that we are telling the customer and the customer telling us, right? So that you can find the connection between the two.